Well, how's this for synchronicity? Book buying can be a very spooky thing sometimes. So a couple of days ago, I put out my podcast, my belated Burns Night podcast, on a Burns poem called Address to Edinburgh. A somewhat maligned poem. Quite a lot of the podcast was taken up with exploring why it's been criticised. Criticisms I don't necessarily disagree with. It's not a defence of the poem. The criticisms are mainly to do with the fact that it was Burns at his most anglicised, playing up to what he thought enlightened Edinburgh might expect of him. And the first and final stanza are repeated, and they end on the line, "I shelter in thy honoured shade," meaning the honoured shade of Edinburgh. So Burns coming across from Ayrshire, sheltering in the honoured shade of the capital city. So I've been looking around one of my favourite bookshops today, McNaughton's on Leith Walk in Edinburgh, and I found this, Honoured Shade, a selection of new Scottish poetry featuring a lot of the usual suspects for these kinds of anthologies: George Mackay-Brown, George Bruce, W.S. Graham, Maurice Lindsay, who I actually mentioned on the podcast. I quoted his Burns Encyclopedia, Hugh MacDiarmid, Edwin Morgan, Edwin Muir, Ian Crichton Smith, Sidney Goodsir Smith, and Norman McCaig, who also edited it. This was brought out in 1959 for Burns's bicentenary, so I haven't dug into it yet, but I'm probably going to read it this evening. There's a couple of notes of interest just from the front matter. The foreword by Sir John McEwen states that this is the year 1959, is the bicentenary of Robert Burns. Mr. Norman McCaig kindly undertook to edit this book and accepted our invitation to include in it one or two new poems of his own. Norman McCaig then says in his own editorial note, "Each of the writers assembled here was invited to contribute poems which have not appeared in any collection of his work. The absence of any notable name is not necessarily due to editorial negligence." Immediately trying to think which notable names are missing, which names were not prepared to give away any unpublished poems. And then the other item of interest in John McEwen's foreword is he mentions that it only remains to add that in January, while we were still in the early stages of planning this book, the death occurred of Edwin Muir, and we are most grateful to Mrs. Muir for allowing us to print some of her late husband's more recent poems. So that gives this book a special honour of its own to have some of Edwin Muir's last written work. Haven't actually done an episode on Edwin Muir yet, but maybe this will spur me on. Anyway, I just wanted to share one of those strange book buying coincidences. Love it when that happens. It's a gorgeously printed. I thought it was Faber from the front, but it's actually Chambers. Nice saltire colours, looking a little bit like pyjamas, but I'm fine with that. You know what, why don't I give you a taste of this volume just to finish the video off. This is Norman McCaig, who edited the volume and selected this as one of his own. In a level light. Sheep wander haloed, birds at their plain song shed pure benedictions on water's painted glass. The gentle worm rears up her hooded head and weaves hot sermons under her steeple of grass. Saints objurgate from thickets, angels bank over the sea, and its crisp texts unfold, silvering the sand's ecclesiastic gold. Accepted in it all, one of its moods, the human mind sits in its sense of sin, hacking across from gross beatitudes, the price to pay warm in its purse of skin, and sees out in the bliss, and out of its, an angel tilt, dive into texts, and float, working his God down his rebelling throat. "Hum," he said, scholarly.